All right, good morning, everybody. It is
Good morning.
May 15 at 11 a.m. My name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer, the senior hearing officer of the State Water Resource Control Board's Administrative Hearings Office. And this is the AHO's proceeding in the court's reference to the State Water Board in City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar, which is Monterey County Superior Court number 20 CV 001387. And this is the status conference I set in the May 3rd, 2023 notice. So with that, I'll just very quickly go through the appearances. I think it's good just for our record to state that I think I did state today is May 15, 2023. So first for California American Water Company, if one of the attorneys can just state the names of all of the attorneys and witnesses who are appearing today, that would be useful.
Bob Moore, Alan Mackins, good morning. Rob Donlin, also representing California American Water. Johnson Ye, here as an expert. Kathy Horning is is here as an attorney representing California American Water. We also have Tim Durbin, not representing, but being the expert. And who's the last one? Anybody remember?
I think you want to mention Mr. Leffler.
Mr. Peter Leffler. Yes, I'm sorry. I drew a blank right then.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Yeah.
And who is appearing today and who are the witnesses for Marina Coast Water District?
Good morning, Mr. Lilly. Kyle Brochard, representing Marina Coast Water District. Also on the line is Chip Wilkins, Christina Berglund, and Ruth Stoner-Muzine. And experts, Ms. Vera Nelson and Dr. Kincaid should be joining us shortly, but I do not see that they are on yet.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brochard. For City of Marina?
Good morning, Mr. Lilly. Skip Spalding and Larissa Meisenheimer for City of Marina. And we also have our expert, Dr. Mark Trudell.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Spalding, and good morning to all of you. And for RMC Pacific?
Good morning, everybody. James Neudecker for RMC Pacific Materials.
Great, thank you. Have I missed anybody? Looks like that covers everybody. And then just so the record is clear from my staff, we have Amy Blanc, Nicole Mullins, Skylar Anderson, and Kyle Woldridge. And then we have Regina Graziano from the State Water Board's Office of Research, Planning, and Performance. And we are recording the meeting. So first of all, thank you all. I'd received the email from Ms. Meisenheimer on Friday, which questioned whether we needed the status conference. I do want to have the status conference, although I will make it as quick as possible because I know you all have a lot of things going on, particularly all the experts I know have a lot of work for this proceeding. So we will do this as quickly as we can. So I do want to just go down the list here. For my May 3rd order, the deadline for Mr. Durbin to complete the regional models and transmit them to the, regional model files for the scenarios to be modeled and transmit them with relevant information was May 11th, which was last week. So, Mr. Durbin, did that in fact happen? You just go off mute too, so we can hear you.
That did happen.
Okay. And while we're on that, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Graziano from my office told me there were two issues. One is we have a missing, there was an empty folder, which I'm sorry here, I've got all my notes and for some reason I'm missing that. Ms. Graziano, what was the empty folder that didn't have anything in it?
It was the heads zips folder that was empty.
Okay. Should this go directly to you or through the attorneys, or how do you want to receive this?
I think the best thing, Mr. Durbin, is just ask one of your attorneys to upload it to. I'm trying to remember. I think we uploaded all the other folders, to all the other files, so that seems to work the best. Just ask if you can make arrangements. I don't mind. It's fine with me if you upload it, but work with the attorney so it's uploaded to CalAM's exhibit folder for uploads, and then we will move it over to the appropriate folder that's posted on the AHO FTP site. So after the upload has been completed, just send us an email with CCs to everyone on the service list advising us that you have done that. And there's going to be another homework assignment for you, so it'll apply to that as well. And that is, and I think I have this right. Ms. Graziano just told me a few minutes ago that what was for the other files where in fact we do have the files, we got the shape files, but what she needs are the actual modeling files that she says include the GPR file or the GV modeling files. And this was spelled out in our March 7th order. And as I understand it, the reason she needs the modeling files rather than the shape files is she doesn't have the actual model to run. So first of all, Ms. Graziano, do I have that more or less correct? I'm talking about something that I don't know very much about here.
Yeah, so Mr. Durbin, from my understanding, you created the regional model using GMS, is that correct?
There's sort of a yes and no. The only thing that I use GMS for is viewing results. The version of GMS that I have is very old, and I don't even have the license for it anymore. So there are no GMS project files to be shared.
Okay, understood.
So what does that mean, Ms. Graziano? What do you need beyond the shape files then that you have that was not posted?
I guess from my understanding, Mr. Durbin, is that your model is now updated, correct? So there's an updated regional model. I will need that regional model and not just the inputs and outputs and the heads.
Now that was uploaded. Let me just check real quick here. That was uploaded on May 1st. So the model calibration results on the calibrated model was done then, and that contains all of the model files. And I might mention that regarding GMS, amongst the model files is what's called a 3DM delta. What is M? I don't know. But anyway, 3DM file that you can display the grid in GMS. And then the head files are, there's a head, there's a .plt file, which is, it can be loaded in GMS, so you can look at contours of groundwater levels. But did you not receive the upload from the first?
Do you know if
I don't believe so. I will look through the emails again.
okay, so I'm a little torn here. On one hand, I don't want to take everyone's time because I'm sure, at least for me, probably for a lot of the lawyers, this is sort of highly technical, not easy to understand material, and I don't know that we need to. But on the other hand, as you know, I've been very strict about trying to avoid ex parte contacts. So I don't, the easiest way would be for Ms. Graziano just to see what she has and call Mr. Durbin and just talk with him about that. But I'm a little hesitant to do that because we've been so rigorous about avoiding ex parte contacts. So I don't know if anyone, does anyone have any suggestions for, let me say this, Ms. Graziano can check over what we got on May 1st, and she can make a list of what she needs. And of course, we can email that so that everyone's in the loop. And hopefully that will solve the problem. But if not, this may be something where we need to have a telephone conversation. But as I say, I don't like to have conversations with just me or one of my staff members with just a party's witness because of my concerns about the ex parte rules. So does anyone have any suggestions for how we can deal with this if we need to? Maybe I gave you an impossible question to answer.
No,
Mr. Lilly,
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Wilkins.
I have conferred with Mr. Donlin on model issues that have come up in exchange, also Mr. Osias. And I'm not saying it has to be Mr. Donlin, but possibly if Ms. Graziano needs additional information, she could set up a call with Mr. Donlin. Mr. Donlin could invite me and Mr. Durbin to participate or someone so that we didn't have an ex parte issue. We had counsel for both sides. And I imagine it would be a pretty short call. Obviously, I'm volunteering someone from our team and someone from Cal-Am's team. But assuming they're willing to do that, I assume we would. And the city may want someone to participate, or they may feel comfortable with just us participating. I'm just volunteering someone from our team.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilkins. I appreciate your constructive approach here. And again, we'll try the review and email, but if we need a follow-up, we'll try to do that because I don't really want to have a status conference with taking up 25 people's time. But that does seem to be a way to respect any concerns about ex parte contact. So, Mr. Spalding or Ms. Meisenheimer, is that okay with you? And would one of you want to be involved, or are you comfortable having Mr. Wilkins be involved for that? It's just going to be to get the model files if we need that.
Yes, we're fine with that, and Mr. Wilkins can represent us.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll do that as a follow-up if necessary. Thank you. Mr. Moore, your hand was up, it went down. Do you have something you want to say or not?
oh, the only thing I was going to say is I volunteer Mr. Osias to take part in this, and we don't have an objection. So,
Okay, so either Mr. Donlin or Mr. Osias, whoever's available.
yes,
I think that's fine. Mr. Lilly, this is Mr. Donlin. I'd be happy to work with Mr. Wilkins, but just to be clear, as I understand it, you will send the list of model files that Ms. Graziano is looking for to the service list. And then I can work with the Cal-Am team and Mr. Durbin to make sure that whatever's on that list gets to Ms. Graziano. I don't know that we need to have a conference about this, but I'm happy to work with Mr. Wilkins if necessary.
Thank you. And that was what I was trying to say. So you said it better. We will do the email approach and then the backup conference call only if necessary. So thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Again, this is just to get the files, but there are a lot of files and they're technically complicated. So we will work through that. And I appreciate everybody's cooperation on that. Okay. So with that, the email I received on Friday from Ms. Meisenheimer proposed some, I'll say, fairly small changes in the deadlines that I had specified in my May 3rd order. And first of all, I'll just say thank you for asking and not just stipulating to change deadlines without asking for approval, because these deadlines are not only for all of you to have time to prepare, each round to help you prepare the next round of documents and of course, prepare for the hearing, but they're also for us. We need time to review these materials. They're technically complex. And of course, we want to be prepared, fully prepared for the hearing And particularly if we're going to take the approach of having our team ask clarifying questions right after the summaries that each witness gives of his or her testimony, and which we're hoping will limit cross-examination. Obviously, that requires more prep time for us. So thank you for asking. And as I understand it, the deadlines are set out here. There are one-day changes in the deadlines for direct for the exchange of the model files, and then for the direct testimony and the rebuttal testimony, and a proposal for a status conference next Monday at 1 p.m. Oh, no, a new status report then, but we won't have a conference unless we need to. And that's probably better anyway. So that all makes sense to me. Again, we've talked about it before. I appreciate the hard work you're all putting into this to try to meet these deadlines and keep this matter going forward. And I won't repeat all the reasons for that. So these one-day extensions seem acceptable to me. And I was just going to ask for comments, but Mr. Wilkins, your electronic hand went up, so go ahead.
Yeah, so we received Mr. Durbin's scenario D results late Thursday night, and we had not looked at them when we sent in the status report update.
Okay.
And we have looked at them over the weekend. We have some concerns. I don't know what the status of Dr. Kincaid is. He was hopefully going to be able to join us, but I know Ms. Nelson is the one who actually has looked at this information. I know she's reached out to Mr. Durbin on this, at least in part. And my gut is that we may need a status conference next week. And I also, without talking to Dr. Kincaid, because he's been in meetings all morning, and I think, I'm struggling with the 1 day right now, and knowing to know if we might need one more day, and how things are going. So, because I don't have an update from the weekend yet, but I'm gonna, if you're, with your permission, I would like Ms. Nelson and at least to identify these issues. And I know Mr. Durbin's on the phone, and I don't want to take a lot of time, but I think it would be helpful to at least alert you to these issues, so they're not a big surprise to you. So if that's okay, I'll ask Ms. Nelson to address the concerns that we've identified thus far.
Okay, so before she does, and I would be glad to hear from Ms. Nelson, but before she does that, could you just clarify? I heard you say another 1 day extension, but I couldn't tell of what. We have 3 different deadlines with proposed extensions here.
This is where I'm struggling without talking to Dr. Kincaid, but I think we might not want to move anything but the calibration model exchange date another day.
Okay, just so we're clear, again, if I'm plotting, bear with me. If my order had it May 16, Ms. Meisenheimer's email wanted to move to May 17, and now you're proposing moving it to May 18. Is that correct?
I believe so, but again, this is
okay. No, it's fine. I just want to make sure I know what you're talking about.
That's what.
All right. So, and first of all, this is exactly why I do status conferences. I think you can all see this is the sort of thing that there could be real problems if this was done with ex parte communication. So. I know it's laborious for you to all be on board, but this way everybody can hear what everyone says. So with that, Ms. Nelson, why don't you go ahead and start and elaborate? I'm now curious as to what the issue is. And I understand you only had a few days to review the model output files from Mr. Durbin. Why don't you tell me if you can summarize briefly what your concern is and how you think you would like to address it. And then I'll ask Mr. Durbin if he has any comments.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've taken a quick look, and I sent some clarifying questions to Mr. Durbin, who was helpful over the weekend in responding, just briefly saying he needed to look into some of my questions and assess whether or not there was a potential issue in the evaluation of scenario D, and that he would be getting back to me. So those were the results of the regional model associated with the Sigma scenarios, in specific MCWD and the city's scenario, which looks at what would happen, if future pumping was cut back. At this point, we asked him to run, and we had a very productive conversation last time about how we wanted him to run that. And he did so, but in looking at some of the data, some things didn't make sense to me, and I just wasn't clear on what he had done. And so he got back to me just saying that he was still looking at it and might be sending us a revised version.
Okay.
And in looking at it, we have some further concerns, which I have not yet discussed with him. In particular, the heads in the 400-foot aquifer appear to be incredibly low to us near the coast and not well calibrated, which would have a tremendous impact on seawater intrusion. And so that is yet another follow-up that we wanted to have with him, but have not yet had a chance to do so.
Okay, well, and I can understand why there could be some challenges here, because this is MCWD scenario, which you've asked Mr. Durbin to run the regional model for. So, Mr. Durbin, what are your comments on that? And, I will just say I continue to, I'll just say, compliment the experts for your cooperative work. I know there are a lot of disagreements here, but I appreciate your trying to work professionally to resolve these issues where you can. So thank you, Ms. Nelson. And Mr. Durbin, what are your comments, response, or status report, whatever you want to tell me? Just go off mute first, though.
Regarding the last thing, that's a model calibration issue, and I and Vera and Todd need to have a conversation about what their concern is, but I would have changing the calibration at this time sets everything really back, and but I need to understand better just what their concerns are and what I can do to ameliorate their concerns.
Okay, and have you scheduled a time to talk with them?
No, because this is the first time that right at this moment is that I knew about this concern.
Okay, well, obviously, the sooner the better. I'm sure you have each other's phone numbers, so please do that as soon as you can. So this, I'm just looking at my table, or the table from the March 7 order on page 3, so I can familiarize myself again with the scenario D's, the D scenarios 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to ask a question that's probably pretty hard for anybody to answer, which is, I'll turn it to you, Mr. Durbin, and Ms. Nelson. I'll just ask. You probably tell me you can't answer this, but how long do you think it's going to take to resolve this issue? Can either of you say anything about that?
I can. I mean, or go ahead, Tim.
I don't know until Vera and I have a chance to talk about this.
Okay.
I can tell you that this gets to this issue of how well Mr. Durbin's model is capable of assessing what the cutbacks in extraction would need to be to raise water levels. So I think it can be done in a two-phase way, where we can raise the water levels in the model based on, the boundary conditions. And then further work could be done by Mr. Durbin to assess potentially what the cutback in pumping might need to be to achieve those. So we could continue to progress on the model scenario based on an assumption that this is, Sigma will get you, this is what Sigma requires. And then if there is additional calibration that would be needed for Mr. Durbin, or if he feels that what he has done is in fact a good estimate, then he could present that and we can rebut it if we think that it's incorrect. But the issue is not one that we can't assess the impacts of the project if Sigma causes water levels to increase. The issue is how well is Mr. Durbin's model calibrated and set up to answer the question as to how much of a reduction is required.
I understand. Sorry, I'm writing here, bear with me. And, we've talked about this before, and I just want to tell you where I'm coming from on this. I know, Ms. Nelson, you testified before that your view is that Sigma will be implemented one way or another, and that will mean that the gradients near the coast will have to be changed. And of course, none of us know exactly what's going to happen over the next several decades, but I have expressed the concern that I don't think my report should just state my draft report, and assuming the state board adopts it, the state board's report to the court. I am very concerned about it simply stating these are the groundwater contours that will be achieved under Sigma, period. Because my understanding is to achieve, of course, that's the goal of Sigma, but my understanding is to achieve those will require very, very significant pumping reductions or other measures that may or may not happen. And of course, the law can change, or the regulatory agencies, including the State Water Board, can change the implementation. Of course, nobody wants seawater intrusion to continue, but on the other hand, nobody wants to shut down huge amounts of Salinas Valley agriculture either. So this is an extremely difficult question. Then we're not going to answer it in this proceeding. But I do want to make sure that the court understands that and doesn't simply have a model scenario that says, well, this is what's going to happen under Sigma without, as far as groundwater changes in groundwater contours, without any good understanding of what that really means. So that's my concern about what you just said, Ms. Nelson. I certainly understand you're proceeding in good faith and as professionally as you can, but from the big picture, I have that very significant concern about this. So
I do understand very much your concern, and I think that the one thing that I just want to, articulate is it's not an easy question to answer. There's a lot of
I
uncertainty.
certainly believe that.
And so one of my concerns is that, that if Mr. Durbin says, oh, I need a 50% cut or a 60% cut, that there's a recognition that there is a significant amount of uncertainty in that number, and that people have been trying for 15 or 20 years to get at that number. And that in some ways, there should be some form of a sensitivity analysis associated with this. And a recognition that Mr. Durbin, although that his model was never designed specifically with this in mind. And that to do a good job on this, my guess is it needs quite a bit more work. So I'm merely saying that I don't think it's impossible for him to do this, but on this time frame, we're identifying issues that I feel are significant in being able to assess this.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. So Mr. Leffler, your electronic hand was up, and then we'll come to you next, Mr. Moore. Your real hand is up. So Mr. Leffler, go first.
Yes, I just want to say I agree with you that we should proceed as we have planned with the regional model. This is the first we've heard of this concern. I mean, there's been no conversation about this yet among the experts. So, that conversation needs to take place. And I would also add that, to the extent that, Mr. Durbin has done this analysis, it's consistent with previous modeling efforts that this magnitude of pumping reduction would be required. So I don't think, we're, indicating something that, isn't consistent with previous work. So, I mean, it just seems like, we shouldn't be, talking about it further at this point in this hearing, that we need, to have a subsequent and quick conversation about this issue and see what the issue is and where we go from there.
Well, and let me just say, sort of thinking out loud here, and I haven't talked with my staff about this, so Mr. Wooldridge or Ms. Graziano may say something different, but Ms. Nelson brought up the concept of sensitivity analysis. I guess I would say it a little differently, but a similar point, which is there are probably going to need to be some boundaries here. Rather than, it doesn't sound like it's possible to say, well, to implement Sigma through groundwater pumping reductions in the 180-400 foot aquifer, pumping reductions will have to be 57.3%. I mean, clearly that's not possible. And that's not necessary either. But what I would like to be able to put in the draft report I send to the board is to implement Sigma as far as achieving these leveling of the gradients near the coast. The technical experts estimate pumping reductions in the order of 50 to 70% in the 180-400 foot aquifer will be necessary, or something like that. I mean, that serves the purpose of addressing the issue that I was trying to articulate when I spoke a few minutes ago. So I hope that helps some as the experts are conferring about this, because I know enough to know that's the best that's possible. I mean, even with the tools you all have, you're not going to be able to come up with exact numbers here, and it's not necessary. But something, what I'm saying is, I think the report needs to say something about the magnitude of pumping reductions that would be necessary to achieve what I'm going to call these flat gradients, rather than simply saying, well, Sigma requires flat gradients, therefore it'll happen one way or another, and we don't know the details. So I hope that helps some. And Mr. Brochard, wait, I'm sorry, Mr. Moore's real hand was up first. So do you have something you want to say further, Mr. Moore?
Yeah, only one thing, Mr. Lilly. I think that sometimes we get involved in some argument going back and forth that will bear on your decision. And I think it's unfortunate, at least in this setting, that we can't address the issues that you're talking about and the other experts are talking about. And I just want to be careful that not too much of that is happening and we don't get the chance to respond.
I'm not following you, Mr. Moore. What is your concern here? I'm trying to have an open discussion here where we can address all the issues that we need to.
Well, okay, and I don't disagree with that. What I disagree with, however, is one expert making an argument, an argument that they believe, I assume, and then it goes on and it doesn't happen, but necessarily our experts are going to give them the opportunity. My point is, I think concisely, is it's not a place for argument. It's a place to get information from you, of course, the direction, but it's not a place for argument.
You mean today?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry if you're concerned about that. I mean, this is all just, I'll say, sort of brainstorming from my point of view, but that the report's going to be based on the testimony and the rebuttal testimony that the experts submit. It's not going to be based on what somebody says today. This today is just trying to work out a process and a schedule to get to the testimony. But anyway, I hope that addresses your concern. I mean, technically the witnesses still are under oath, but this is them working with me to try to develop a process and a schedule, and I appreciate them. And I'm not really considering it for anything beyond that. And to the extent Ms. Nelson is giving me information, it's helpful, but for that purpose, not for what the final report will say. So I hope that allays some of your concerns, Mr. Moore.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've said that before. That's why the written proposed testimony or written proposed rebuttal testimony is so critical here, because that's something we can parse out, scrutinize word by word, sentence by sentence, check the exhibits, and that's what we want to base our report on. I mean, there may be some additional clarifications during the hearing, but those written products are the critical things for our report. So, okay, Mr. Bouchard, I think your electronic hand was up. Are you still, do you have something you want to say, or have we moved on?
I mean, we can address it later in briefings and stuff. I have the same concerns that I've had in the past with your statements that you want to use Mr. Durbin's model to know what the reductions would be. But again, the reductions could be full reductions equally over some amount of space, over the entire basin, over multiple sub-basins. It could be more direct reductions over a smaller area. There could be some combination of recharge in certain areas. There are a myriad of ways to change the gradients that just will not in any way be analyzed in these proceedings. So to think that we're going to come up and tell the board that to level these gradients will require X, I mean, we can ask Mr. Durbin to run a number on that, but that X will just be the result of one scenario that is very unlikely to occur, not because it would require a great amount of a reduction in pumping of a certain amount, but because there is other agencies that are not present here that are going to have a say in this, and there's going to be other modeling, and I imagine a lot of other input until the decision is made as to how they're going to balance these gradients.
Okay, and when I said what I just said about the pumping reduction, I was thinking that, and I was thinking somebody's going to criticize me for saying that, and you did. And Ms. Nelson said this during our last status conference. I remember her words were, it depends whether you make the reductions in a smart way or in sort of a, I don't know what her word was, not smart way, basically, though. Because clearly, and I've been working in the Salinas Valley for a long time. I know something about this. Is clearly pumping reductions in the 180, 400 foot aquifer, which we used to call the pressure subbasin. I think it's the same area. Clearly, those have a much more beneficial impact on reducing seawater intrusion than pumping reductions farther upstream. For example, we used to call it the 4-bay aquifer. I'm not sure I think it still may be called that. But I get that. And then, of course, there are what hopefully can happen, which is additional recharge, which is, at least institutionally better than pumping reductions if it can be done appropriately. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to sort of turn it back to you, Mr. Bouchard. And obviously, you have very qualified people working for you here. It's going to be up to Marina Coast and City of Marina to spell out as best you can what you think are plausible scenarios for SIGIM implementation for your option D. And it doesn't have to be just one. If the answer is, okay, to achieve the flat groundwater gradients in the local model, these are the types of things that could be done. It could be roughly this range of pumping reduction solely in the 180, 400 foot aquifer, or it could be across the board reductions of this amount. I mean, I don't really want a whole bunch of different scenarios, but 2 or 3 may make sense here, or a combination of this amount of pumping reduction and this amount of additional recharge.
It's my understanding that based on either timeline that have been proposed here, it's not possible to do that.
Okay, well, that's a concern, because I'm telling you, I think there needs to be some backup to simply saying we've input boundary conditions to the local model that would create what I'm calling the flat groundwater gradients. So two electronic hands went up. I'm going to go to Mr. Wilkins because his hand went up first, and then shift over to Ms. Nelson. This is a tough discussion, but it's important for us to have it now.
Yeah, I was going to address what you asked me about was the time frame for exchanging the calibrated model, because Dr. Kincaid is now on the line, although I have not had a chance to confer with him in terms of how much, whether 1 day was going to be sufficient or 2 or what. I don't want to put him on the spot without talking to him either. So, but I wanted to let you know he is here, and I'm hoping that I don't know if we can take a 5-minute break so I can check in with him about realistically if tomorrow, Thursday, is going to work for exchange of the calibrated model. But anyway, I wanted to let you know he's here, and I do want to answer your question on that before we go today.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Kincaid. I think a break does make sense, but Ms. Nelson's hand went up. So please go ahead with your comments, Ms. Nelson, and then as necessary, probably a break would be a good idea here.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to alert you to the fact that given the timeframes that have been set, we have identified one possible scenario for scenario D. In other words, the idea that we could have multiple at this point has been, everyone has backtracked from that because it just doesn't seem feasible within the timeframes.
Okay.
And it is problematic because, as Mr. Durbin pointed out, when I had said that you could just reduce pumping, if I say I reduce pumping by 20%, that's the same thing as adding 20% water. And Mr. Durbin pointed out that that's not true because you get recharge from the irrigation. And so you actually need to add much less water than what the amount is that you have to cut. And it relates to the fact that you get return flows from agriculture. So if one wanted to say 50% of the, I'm going to take a portion of this area and add water to it, and but reduce pumping, do some combination of pumping versus extraction reduction, extraction reductions versus adding water, you would actually have to evaluate that.
Okay, I understand that, and that's a good point. Mr. Durbin, go ahead. Your electronic hand is up.
Yeah, I think I understand what is being said. And correct me, Vera, if I'm wrong, but in the work that I've done so far, I've tried to take account that there, even in the land that no longer had pumping, there would be recharge from that. Is that sort of what you're getting at? Or?
Go ahead, Ms. Nelson.
Yeah, so it was, we're going to get into the weeds, I think, unfortunately, but
It's okay.
our understanding of what has currently been assessed as scenario D is that we would reduce pumping by 50% as a first cut in different areas to get at how much of a reduction in pumping would lead to no further seawater intrusion, and that the areas where there is no pumping, let's say you would fallow the land for the remaining 50%. And that would turn into, natural grasslands or natural vegetation. So there is no added recharge to that. That's my understanding as to how this scenario has gone forward. And we had this debate of, do you include, if you were to add water to the system, that would not be the case because you would continue to have irrigation flows, which is not being represented here. That was my understanding, that the scenario that we had come to with Tim was, let's just make this simple, sort of stupid, right? We're just going to cut back the pumping, and it would be done incrementally at the coast, but that in reality, there's really no assessment of how much, rather than cutting pumping, if you added water, what that might look like.
Okay.
And Tim, is that your understanding?
Oh,
I mean,
good.
I want to make sure I'm representing what I think we're doing.
No, this is helpful for me, and I appreciate us doing it in this forum. I know it's not the easiest forum for you two to do this, but it's helpful for all of us to hear this. So go ahead, Mr. Durbin.
But I did, and which I understood to be, the instructions that I got from, the call that you and I and Dr. Kincaid had a week ago Friday, that the assumption was that the land that no longer had pumping would be returned to native vegetation, and that there would be recharge from that native vegetation area commensurate with the recharge associated with that kind of land cover. And if that's not it, we probably need some maybe offline discussion, but
No, that's totally correct. And what I'm saying though is that if you had a situation where rather than fallowing land and letting it return to native vegetation, you took water off the river for some portion of the meeting Sigma requirements, that would be a very different situation where you wouldn't actually be cutting pumping, but you would be adding recharge to certain areas. And there, as such, it's not a one-to-one. In other words, a 10% reduction in pumping is not equivalent to a 10% add in if you add water, you get additional benefits from the fact that that land is not fallowed. In fact, you're irrigating now, and now you're getting those return flows back.
Well, that's of course not the scenario I ran, and
No, that's not. I agree, and that's why I'm just saying that it's not a simple. What we are doing is assessing one possible scenario, and that's all that it will do.
Okay.
There are many other scenarios that would lead to very different numbers as far as how much water would actually have to be cut if for example, were able to meet some of Sigma demands through a addition of water to the basin.
Okay, and so let me just stop right there, because that is good. I mean, I appreciate the clarification, and that's clearly all you have time to do at this point. But what you can do beyond modeling, Ms. Nelson, of course, working with your attorneys, is and I assume this would be yours, but your testimony, your written proposed testimony, can discuss just that. I mean, I'll say the obvious. You can talk about numbers even if you're not modeling them. And you can, what you just said, and going back to what Mr. Moore's comment was, I'm not going to rely on what you're saying today. But if you put that in your written proposed testimony, due to time constraints, here's the scenario we ran. However, in actual Sigma implementation, there are these potential variations on that. Of course, the more quantitative you can be, the better, but recognizing there are limitations to how quantitative you can be without doing the actual modeling. But let's not lose perspective here. That's all I need for the report, the draft report I am preparing. Is what I try to keep saying is some kind of a reality check on what Sigma implementation means. And as I said it before, I'll say it one more time. I'm not satisfied with simply saying we adjusted the boundary conditions to achieve flat water or flat gradients or no gradients. Something more than that is needed. But what Ms. Nelson you're describing makes a lot of sense to me. Here is the scenario we ran, but there are many variations. Here are potential variations on that for how it could actually occur. But again, it's all in the context of what I want is some reality check on the Sigma implementation assumptions that would go into the boundary conditions in the local model for the flat gradients. So I hope that gives some clarification here, and hopefully that makes it somewhat simpler so you don't get more bogged down in the regional model than is necessary. So with that, I'm inclined to have a break, like an hour break, to have you come back and tell me what's a reasonable approach and schedule here. But Mr. Durbin, I'll turn back to you. Your electronic hand went up first, and then I'll turn to Mr. Leffler. Go ahead.
Oh, my apologies. My that was left from.
Oh, you're taking your electronic hand down. Okay, Mr. Leffler, do you want to add something here?
Actually, I guess not on this topic. So what we're talking about right now is scenario D. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, none of this affects, you know, the most near-term deadline, which is the calibration model files. Well, you know, whether that is, you know, the original date or the date that was suggested in the Friday email. You know, I just want to clarify that none of this affects the work on the calibrated model.
Oh, that's a pretty important point here. I do see that. Now I'm going to ask a dumb question. That the deadline was May 16 for calibrated local model files, which have been proposed to change to May 17 to May 18th. But does everyone agree? Can you do those calibrated local model files before you do the scenario files? Is that correct? So,
Yes, they're two. Well, I'll let the modeler speak, but yeah, that's correct.
Okay, I think so. So it looks like what we're really talking about here are the scenario files for what had been the May 30th deadline, which you're proposing to change to May 31st. So thank you, Mr. Leffler. That's a pretty important clarification. Mr. Wilkins, your electronic hand went up. Go ahead.
Well, I would prefer to address this after lunch, after I get a chance to talk to Dr. Kincaid about this, but we did talk without Dr. Kincaid this morning because he was unavailable. And there is some concern on our side that when you run scenarios, sometimes you will find that you need to tweak your model because you've identified an anomaly or you know, something a glitch in the model, and you know that's a normal process in terms of modeling, as I understand it. Again, I'm not the expert. That you may need to make some small tweaks to your model because you've identified something when you're running your scenarios that doesn't work or something like that. So, but I think we are in agreement that in general, given our short time frame where we are being asked to produce a calibrated model, that we don't need this issue resolved before we turn over calibrated models. But it isn't the ideal way to do it, is what I understand. But given the way you've asked for the testimony to proceed, it is the only way to do it. And so, again, in terms of the time frame, I would like to confer with Dr. Kincaid and see where they're at after the weekend before giving you the reality on it. But I think Mr. Leffler is correct that this in the way things are set up, the changes will not affect how the calibrated model is exchanged.
Okay. And just so we're clear, the way I've asked for this to be done was what you had all proposed. I may have pushed you on the schedule, but as far as the steps, I didn't make up these steps. These
No,
were
I think that the issue here is because you've asked us in the questions to explain the differences between the models, we would need to have analyzed each other's models before we submit our direct. Whereas if we weren't explaining the differences in the direct, we in theory could submit the calibrated model slightly later. But again, that's not the way it's set up right now. And maybe after lunch, I may have a request, but I do need to confer with Dr. Kincaid first.
okay. Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking at the. Okay, and this may be my fault, that the primary purpose of the direct testimony, which was due on May 30th, and you're proposing to be due on May 31st, is for each expert or each side to explain its model scenarios and the assumptions and why they're basically appropriate assumptions. And then the explaining the differences with the other side's model, and assuming you still think your side's assumptions are better, why they're better. That was, I was intending for that to be primarily done during the rebuttal phase, which was going to be due on June 13, and you're proposing to be due on June 14th. So if I've mishmashed that or mixed that up, I apologize. But does that help, Mr. Wilkins, with that clarification?
I think so. We'll have to look at the questions again with our experts, but that does help, yes.
Okay, well, thanks. And I'm sorry if I mean, you know where I want to get, and I'm trying to help you all have a process to get there. So, Mr. Leffler, go ahead.
Well, I guess just one clarification, if I heard Mr. Wilkins correctly, is you know, I don't believe that you need to run the scenarios in order to, you know, reconfirm your calibration model. But, you know, your scenario A, you should be able to proceed and finish that, you know, independent of running the scenarios.
Okay.
I did
No,
say,
I mean, I
right.
think this is Mr. Wilkins, and, you know, he's like me, he's a lawyer, and we try to understand this stuff and we do the best we can, I think. But the concept that you may need to tweak some calibration when you're doing the model scenarios certainly seems plausible to me. I'll just leave it at that. So I don't know. Well, here's what I'd like to do. It's just before noon. I propose we get back at 1. I'm sorry to interfere with your lunch breaks, but this is important. And I'd like to hear back from you by 1 o'clock on whether or not or what you think is an appropriate schedule. You know, I'm hoping all we need to do is change a couple of these deadlines by 1 day or potentially 2 days, but the steps still make sense. But if you're telling me they don't, then we're going to have to come back and reevaluate it. So I'll just say one more time, I hope I've been clear on the context of why I think the Sigma implementation scenarios are necessary for the report. And certainly, I would expect all of the experts who are providing testimony about Sigma implementation scenarios would put in the qualifiers about something along the lines of, I'm doing the best I can to predict what's going to happen over the next several decades. And there certainly are a lot of potential ways this could play out, and nobody can possibly predict exactly how it's going to play out. So I hope that helps some, but I do think that context is important. So unless there's anything else, let's plan to come back at 1 o'clock. So Mr. Woldridge, can people all log off and then use the same login info to log back on at 1 p.m.? That's probably better than so people don't have to just stay logged in.
I think that we'll have to ask Ms. Blanc if she's on, but I think we'll probably do a new meeting.
Okay, can we do a new meeting? Ms. Blanc, can we do a new meeting with the same call-in information?
Yes.
Okay. So is it okay for everyone to log off and then to log back on at 1 o'clock?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so let's plan to do that. And the goal is for you, hopefully one attorney per side, to report back on what you've worked out on schedule. If you have time, after you talk internally, if you want to talk to their side, I know you only have an hour, but you do have an hour. Don't hesitate to call the other side. You all know each other's numbers and so forth. And we'll go from there. And just for my staff, I'm gonna just send out it looked like there were some emails regarding the model file issues, so I'm gonna set up a short internal conference call. We'll use a different calling number, obviously, to make sure we have the questions we need, and we may have some follow-up questions about what we need for the model files when we come back at 1, we'll tell you if we have any more details on what we need. So with that, let's all sign off and plan to be back at 1 o'clock. We'll do a new recording, but same login information. Thank you all.